Pretty much, Quentin only has 4 chapters, but most of what happens to him happens in other people's chapters. So it was a bit tough to work out his whole storyline. Pretty much, Quentin grew up as Lord Yonrud's ward, and has been sent across the Narrow Sea to court Daenerys, as per an agreement between the Red Viper, Sir Willem Darry, and the Sea Lord of Braavos. It was intended to be between Viserys and Ariane, but Doran hopes that Quentin and Dany can fulfill it. We meet Quentin in Volantis, where he's trying to find a ship to Mereen. In his travels, 3 of his 6 companions have died, and he's currently accompanied by Garrus Drinkwater, a sexy knight, and Arch Euronwood, otherwise known as the Big Man. Quentin is posing as the merchant's serving man, as he is uncomfortable with the pressure of playing the merchant. No ship will take him to Mereen because there's a war, so they come up with a plan to sign up as sellswords with the Windblown, who are setting sail for Astapor to fight for the Yunkai. Once they're there, they fight in the army of Astapor. It's pretty much an easy win. Quentin fights as Archer's squire and has taken the nickname Frog. They begin marching to Mereen to fight Dany. Yunkai's army is surprisingly inept, aside from the sellswords. Quentin and his friends and the other Westerosi are sent by the Tattered Prince to defect to one of Dany's sellsword companies and infiltrate her army. They join Dario's Stormcrows and are presented to Dany. Quentin outs his fellow Windblown and presents the proposition. This is the day before Dany weds Hisda, but she still rejects Quentin. Quentin tries to convince her once more as she's leaving for a wedding. Again, she refuses and gets married. At a feast between the Yunkish commanders and Dany's people, Dany takes Quentin to show him her dragons. She promises him that while she won't marry him, she'll give him what he wants, fire and blood. After Dany flies away on Drogon, Barristan warns Quentin and his friends to leave Mereen, as Hisda may use him as a scapegoat for the poisoning of Bellis. Quentin refuses, saying he can't go home empty-handed. He then hatches a plot to steal one of Dany's dragons for Dorne. He meets with the Tattered Prince and barters their aid for Pentos, which I don't know what he was going to do there. They pose as brazen beasts and use a secret password, dog, to get past the other brazen beasts. Unfortunately, they come across 4 locust and a basilisk masked brazen beast, which belong to the Shave Pate, whose own plot is ongoing, and they expect Groleo as the password. They kill the guards and enter the dragon pit. Quentin tries to subdue the dragons, first by feeding them, then choosing one and whipping them as Dany did to Drogon. As he's trying to capture Viserion, Rhaegal turns him into barbecue. He dies a few days later from his severe burns. Barristan treats with Arch and Drink, who are captives, and plans to send them home with Quentin's bones if they return to the Yunkish camps and rescue the Queen's hostages.
I was gonna say Quentin. I thought Quentin was gonna be one of the boring discussions, but you guys found some really crackpot theories to talk about.
There were lots of great Quentin crackpot theories. That was almost a sentence, not quite.
So let's jump into the biggest one. So you guys think Quentin is alive?
I
Sure,
don't.
why not?
That's not mine.
I want him to be alive.
No, he's alive.
Does no one else think he's alive apart from me?
I don't
No,
think it's
you're the only
impossible.
one.
I definitely don't think it's impossible. I really liked the theory I read about it, but I don't think it's true.
I mean, you guys know of the big theory, right? That none of Martin's POVs are dead, except for Ned Stark and Quentin so far. That usually none of his POVs die, except for Jon Snow, except for the prologues, except for Kevin Lannister.
The theory is basically that the one who got torched is the
Tatters.
Tattered Prince, because he's burned to a crisp. And all we know is that everyone calls him the prince, and he sort of mutters about being a prince, presumably. But the Dornishmen might be lying, and Quentin might now have a dragon, and he's secretly alive, and he's going to go marry Dany, and everyone's going to be happy.
I think it's also partly to do with the way in which the final Quentyn chapter, the alleged final Quentyn chapter, is written.
Yeah, and
which
that's
is
definitely a fair point.
You know, I love George R. R. Martin, and I really hate when snobbish friends of mine say, "Oh, well, it's a fine story, but you know, at the sort of sentence level, it's really badly written." That really annoys me. And yeah, when you read the description of Quentyn burning alive by dragons, it is actually quite badly written, because there's this hilarious final sentence where he's like, "I observed, you know, the whip burning and then my hand," and he's like, "Oh," and then he's like, "I'm dying." No one does that in reality. If you're being burned, no one says, "Oh." It's so bad.
Actually, that's not true. I burned my hand once, and I looked at my hand, and then I realized, oh shit.
But do you think that there's a difference? Do you think there's a difference of degree in being burnt, like cooking, versus being burnt by dragon? One would hope so.
They say dragon fire is.
The other theory being that with George
your
R. R. Martin,
your reaction does kick in a second later. I mean, it does take some time for you to realize that.
Okay,
what's
the other kind of part of that burning theory is that if you were being burnt by dragon breath, you'd kind of be blinded by that level of fire and heat. But anyway, that's kind of like all very technical. Who knows?
Blinded and your eyes would melt.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, it's a dragon and it's fantasy. Like, let's not worry about that. But there's just a sense in which whenever I read George R. R. Martin describing someone die, and there's an ellipse of time, so he's like, "Oh, I'm burning," but I don't actually kind of physically see him burnt to a crisp, and it's kind of the chain of evidence is broken. If I don't see that burnt body being carried out by some peeps into the bedchamber where he's then monitored by Missandei and dies, I don't believe it. And if that sounds paranoid, George made me that way.
My only argument against this is the dragons have not left the city, right? They are in one of the Great Master's pyramids. So if Quentin is riding one of them, he would have taken it somewhere else.
It's not that he's currently riding one. It's that he did manage to and is still alive somewhere.
Yeah, he's like waiting for Dany to come back, and then he can be like, "Look, one of the dragons likes me." Because I will say, in his defense, one of the dragons definitely did like him. If there'd only been one of them there, I think he could have tamed it. It was just that he doesn't have quite enough dragon mojo to keep two of them calm, and the other one torched him.
And I think none of them could. I mean, even Dany says herself she wouldn't be game enough to try and ride two dragons. You know, that even she knows it's impossible.
Because he does have Targaryen blood, doesn't he? I mean,
yeah.
It is the case that the Martells, there was the original Daenerys who was married into that family. And there is, like, when you go back and read it, there is something kind of slightly weird about the phraseology that Dany chooses to use when she takes him to visit the dragons, which is all about, "You didn't come for me, you came for fire and blood, and, you know, the dragon will have 3 heads and whatnot." Yeah. So, you know, at first I thought this was a totally crackpot theory, and I'm sure it probably 51% still is. But I have to say I'm closer to believing it than I ever thought I would be. And I think it would be an awesome twist.
There's one thing that shuts it down, though, which is his companions. When they find when they come across Quentin in his burnt state, the big man's cradling him in his arms while Drinkwater's defending them with his sword. It doesn't seem like something that they would do for the tattered prince. The guy's got burnt hands from putting out Quentin's flames. So I think there's a big clue in that it is Quentin, because there's no way that they would grieve like that for the tattered prince. They would be out of there if it was the tattered prince.
Maybe they're really good actors.
I don't know. They both.
But burning your own hands, that's going a bit too far.
That's a fair point, actually. I would not burn my hands.
There is one point though, we don't see the Tatter Prince after that incident. I mean, the Tatter Prince and Pretty Meadows were there kind of in the general area, but then Marriston, when he releases them, he doesn't actually talk with the Windblown. He talks with Quentin's companion saying, "Hey, if I let you go, and also the Windblown let you go, can you go and rescue the hostages?" Right? He doesn't talk to Maris or Tattered Prince, so suspiciously they are missing.
It's also the case that when he interrogates them, their stories are very clear and concise, you know, about the break-in and, like, you know, what happens up until the point when the dragons go berserker. And, you know, I just think that it's like all ellipses in Martin. Maybe it's just going to end up being one of those Jane Westerling things with the broad hips. But at this point, I need more evidence. I'm not shutting this down yet.
That's fair.
Oh yeah, and Bina, I think you are the one who wrote this, right? Where if Martin or if Quentin could be the sun that rises in the west and sets in the east.
Yeah, like
Isn't he? Isn't he supposed to be the one?
Oh,
like who did you think that was?
Yeah, I mean him being the sun's son because of Martell's sigil and him coming from west and dying in the east. So I thought that was pretty cool.
yeah,
But
that's clever
there's two
wordplay.
different bits of the prophecy, right? There's the sun. Everyone thinks he's the sun that rises in the west and sets in the east. But my point is whether he is the sun's son, but as well.
Yeah, because Dani it's spoken to her, and yet somehow she interprets it each word correctly, because they sound the same but they're spelled differently. So somehow she interprets it correct, which I find a bit odd.
Well, I think there are two different things here, right? The first one was given by Quaid, which is Hear me, Danny's the glass candles are burning, soon comes the pale mare, after her the others, Krakens and the dark flame, lion and griffin, the sun's son and the mama's dragon, trust none of them, remember that undying, beware of the perfume seneschal. And the sun rises in the west and sets in the east was given by Mary Marsdoul, right? About when her womb would be quickening. So both of them can be true. The sun's son can be Quentin, and also rises in the east and the sets in the west can also be him.
Exactly. Although why should Dani not trust Quentin? Like,
Oh
'cause the
yeah.
sun- because
Well, I'm suspicious of Quaid. I don't want to trust her completely.
I love Shanti Collins' Quaith is future Daenerys theory.
Oh, nice.
what?
Shanti Collins believes that Quaith is future Dany.
No.
That's
Okay.
cool.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
Google that after this. I might even Google it now.
I think
and
he's
dial
the
off
only person in the
podcast.
world who believes that.
That is just way too cool. Okay.
I mean, that prophecy is filled with some things that are true, some things that are false. I mean, she says that the griffin is coming, but the griffin doesn't come. And she does point at the perfume seneschal, which I think is too far-fetched.
But at the time that the prophecy's made, all those people are on their way. But there's something intervenes between the prophecy being made and the griffin actually coming towards Dany. Because when Quaith makes the prophecy, they're all intending to go to Dany. It's just that other things intervene in between that prophecy and Griffin deciding to go to Westeros instead.
Okay, can I ask a question of all you non-believers that Quentin's alive? If Quentin isn't alive, is George R.R. Martin a bad writer? Because is he just another example of a Ned-type figure who's kind of a nice guy and a good, obedient son, and he just goes on a classic mythic adventure, a great adventure, as he calls it, which will one day be sung about in songs, and just ends up dying because he's not clever enough to play the game? I mean, what does he achieve? What does that whole Quentin storyline achieve? So my question was, if Quentin is really dead, what was the point of this storyline? Did we just follow this whole bunch of people go to Dany just to prove once again, like Ned Stark, that decent, normal, ordinary people end up dead? That seems to me like a waste of time.
It depends what happens next. If nothing comes of it, then yes, and that would be irritating. But I can't imagine that the presence of the Dornish in Mereen isn't going to matter, or that what he tried to do with the dragons won't matter, or that something won't come of it.
He fits in. He's a perfect Dornish for me. I mean, like all Dornish, he's overrated, overconfident, self-entitled idiot. Just like Red Viper.
How dare you?
I don't like the Dornish at all. This is exactly what Red Viper did. This is exactly what Arya did. They all come up with these big plans, and it's like goes nowhere.
I completely agree. It's like Quentin's storyline to me. If he's really dead, that was a bit boring. And with Prince Doran, he doesn't tell anyone anything. He reminds me of Dr. Strangelove, the Stanley Kubrick film, where Dr. Strangelove is like, if you don't tell anyone you've got the doomsday machine, it doesn't work. If you don't tell anyone you have this cool plan, the world carries on and it's pointless. I find Dawn very frustrating, and I guess I have to wait to the end of the series to work out whether it's just peculiarly badly written for a writer he's so exceptional, or whether there's some big grand Dornish plan that we will soon find out about.
This is the only Doran Martell plan, right? I mean, everything else was done by somebody else. This was Doran Martell's plan after waiting for like 12 years or whatever, 20 years since the rebellion. This is his big move. Okay, I'm gonna send my son to marry Dany, and it fails. And Doran's
Yeah,
supposed
but
to
he
be
sent
this
her.
grand master guy, right?
Yeah, but by not telling Arianne his plan, he basically provokes Arianne to go into open rebellion and compromises, the bodily being of Marcella, which is really tactically bad. And he sends Quentyn off, but I mean, okay, there's this kind of theory that he sends him to foster at House Ironwoody because he's going to learn what it is to rule. But I just feel really bad for Quentyn. He's this really obedient, good son, and he's sent off basically quite ill-equipped. I mean, compare him to young Griff and the kind of education that young Griff has, the backing that he has. I feel really bad for Quentyn. It almost feels like when Illyrio sells Dany off to Khal Drogo, and it's almost like, yeah, she's got slim chances of surviving that one. And I feel the same for Quentyn, that his dad sent him off, kind of knowing he had quite rubbish chances of surviving, which is pretty harsh.
Yeah. Well, I think Quentyn was the backup. He was always the backup because until while Viserys was alive, it was Arianne that was going to be the marriage, and Quentyn was being, Doran really misjudges Quentyn and his ability to woo Dany, and I think that's his biggest failure.
Sorry.
Now, his biggest failure is misjudging Quentyn. I mean, he barely knows the kid because he's been fostered away for however many years of his life. And, Quentyn's no Casanova. He's not, he's not going to get Dany. And I think Quentyn's story is more about him coming to terms with the fact that he's not marrying Dany. He's doing it for Dawn. And once he comes to that realization, he makes his one big move to be in the history books, and it goes badly for him. And if it doesn't eventuate to anything else, I think it's just the tragedy of the fact that the one big thing he tried to do in his life, in any other story, it would go well and, he'd be rewarded for that. But in A Song of Ice and Fire, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. I also think they were very unlucky, like the pirate attack that killed half their group, and their timing and like a couple other things just meant that they were like, I don't know, there are scenarios in which they would have gotten to Doran with better timing and to Mereen with better timing and better luck, even with Quentyn's sort of lack of charm, but they also sort of had the fates against them.
No, I'm sorry. It's just, you guys are just so nice. It's a sucky plan. If Doran wants to send Quentyn off to woo Dany, then why didn't he do so when Dany was, back in the days of Pentos, when it would have been an even match?
Viserys was alive.
Yeah, but even then, it's cementing an alliance. And where was the wooing of Arianne to Viserys when we meet Viserys? But when we meet Viserys, Viserys is unmarried.
Yeah, Doran was just a coward. I mean, he was waiting for the perfect time, and bam, he was too late.
He didn't send Quentyn because if they give up Quentyn and Arianne, then they miss out on the opportunity to get any other noble houses in with them, even just to cement something with their own bannermen. That's why he fostered him with the Ironwoods, because he was terrified the Ironwoods would rebel. And he didn't do it earlier because if they did it earlier, they would have been like, hey, Robert Baratheon, we're sending people to the Targaryens. And Robert would have murdered everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So this is my point. At every single time that we have known this series of books to be in, it's been a sucky plan. When Viserys was single in Pentos, if he'd have sent Arianne, it would have shown his cards too early. Now it's too late because, for whatever reason, she doesn't have a Khal. She's very weak in Mereen. She's already married someone else. I just feel that what is it? I find the Dornish really frustrating. Prince Doran says they're not a very well populated region. They don't have an army since Lady Nymeria torched it. It seems to me they're always hatching these absurd plots that they don't tell anyone about to parlay their tactical advantage. And really, they don't have the strength to support. These guys are actually weaker than the Ironborn. They're the
Exactly.
weakest.
I don't. The Dornish have never proved themselves outside Dawn, right? I mean, they were very good insurgents. They were very good rebellion. Who knows how they're going to do in this Five Kings War?
But even then, Prince Doran says to one of his daughters, the Balladeers exaggerated how good we were when the last time the Targs came and invaded to make themselves sound like the better conquerors. Actually, we've always been really, really weak. So to me, it feels like Dawn, if they were at all clever, would play themselves like the Eyrie and just stay out of it. But I find the sacrifice of Quentin, if it doesn't come to anything, really cruel. And I guess I should expect nothing less from George, right? But it's sad because he's a good kid.
I think the other consequences of Quentin will be felt back in Westeros once the news travels. And once, I mean, Ariane's half her personality is based on her rivalry with her brother. And once that's removed, and how will the Dornish feel knowing that Quentin died? It was killed by Dany's dragon.
But how far will that be publicized?
For Doran to throw in with Aegon instead.
But how far will that be publicized? Because if Doran and Dawn publicize that Quentin was killed in Mereen, the rest of Westeros is going to be like, why the hell was your kid in Mereen? you traitorous what's it?
Yeah, but I'm not so much publicizing it. I mean, once the news may travel back.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect time for them to join the war because there is no united Westeros, right? The North's gone, Riverrun, Bolton's, and the King's Landing doesn't have its power is not as powerful anymore. So if Dawn declared its independence, I don't think they'll be in a bad shape.
But there's a crucial difference between Dawn declaring independence and Dawn making a move on power beyond its borders. Because I still don't see, I mean, of course, Westeros is completely weakened right now, but Dawn doesn't really have what I would consider to be a puissant army. It doesn't have a navy.
It's supposed to have 6,000 soldiers at the pass, I think, the Princess Pass.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, the Golden Company's got however many. I mean, I just think Dawn could declare independence and go it alone as Dawn, but I don't think Dawn can really seriously make a play for... they're not like the Golden Company who can say, right, in 10 days' time, we're going to take on Storm's End or we're going to take on King's Landing. And, the male heir is dead. Ariane at 23 is unmarried. They could do something there. But I don't know. They just strike me as deeply... I want to believe that Doran, because he's like this anti-normal hero, this gouty old, potentially quite sleepy guy, I want to believe he's going to turn out to be this sort of tactical mastermind, but I'm just ever disappointed by him.
Yeah, same here. I don't like the Dornish. I think they're overrated. I'd rather take the Ironborns.
We'll have to see what happens next.
Yeah, I think Quentin's death will have an effect on the next book and what happens there. And even if that's the only effect, I think that's the reverberation of that. I mean, how would Dany feel knowing that Quentin died, trying to release her dragons? That's
a good point, actually. Yeah, Jessica, you've made me think about it in a new light. I think that's really. I think the impact of his death on Dany, I think, is really interesting. So yeah, it's kind of weird because Dawn I find really unsatisfying, but it's the region where I'm most excited to see what happens in the Winds of Winter. So we'll see what happens.